Television broadcast of this City Club Forum is made possible in part by National City. We provide financial solutions for individuals and businesses in 7 Midwestern states and selected markets nationally. At National City, we care about doing what's right for our customers.
John Carroll University, educating undergraduate and graduate students to be leaders in business and technology, education, the sciences, and many other fields. John Carroll University, strong Jesuit tradition, solid education, sound future.
Nordson Corporation, a world leader in systems that apply adhesives, sealants, and coatings during manufacturing operations to make today's products work better and last longer.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland, America's citadel of free speech for 93 continuous years. My name is Kevin Donahue, President of the City Club Board of Trustees, and on behalf of the entire board and staff of the City Club, I'd like to welcome you today to our traditional Friday Forum. In this important political season, much has been said about whether there are 2 or more Americas or one America. Democrats and Republicans are crisscrossing the nation, and in fact even the globe, searching for Americans everywhere to register to vote and hopefully back their particular candidates at the local, state, and national levels. Strategists pore over the latest polling numbers, hoping to devise new ways to get out the African American vote, the Latino vote, the Asian vote, or voters from the north, south, east, or west. But who has what clout, and what does it really matter? Well, today's City Club speaker is uniquely qualified to provide some interesting insights into that particular question and others as well. Eric Liu is a young leader whose experience bridges politics, media, business, and activism. Hailed as one of the 25 most influential Asian Americans in the country, Mr. Liu has an impressive background of government service. He has served as President Clinton's Deputy Domestic Policy Advisor during the second Clinton term, which he helped lead the administration's work in education, crime, and other issues. During the first Clinton term, Mr. Liu was a global policy speechwriter for the President and a director for legislative affairs at the National Security Council. One of the founding group of on-air commentators for MSNBC and a contributing writer for Slate magazine, Mr. Liu is also a nationally recognized author and speaker on major public issues of the day. Among his works is The Accidental Asian, Notes of a Native Speaker, a collection of essays on racial identity that was a New York Times notable book in 1998. Mr. Liu has been hailed by the New York Times and the Washington Post as a leading new political voice and by GQ magazine as a pundit that we like. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome to the City Club podium Mr. Eric Liu.
Thank you very, very much. That GQ Pundit We Like award is kind of the award that GQ gives to ugly people. It's, but I was glad to claim it anyway. Kevin, Mayor Campbell, all of you gathered here, members of City Club, it is truly a very, very deep honor for me to be here with you today. I know what a distinguished roster of speakers and leaders I join here today throughout the, I think, 92-year history of this organization, and it's quite motivating and humbling to be here with you. I come from Seattle, and I first of all want to apologize for bringing the weather with me this morning. But as I thought about coming here today from Seattle, I thought about a lot of the things that connect our two cities. One is, of course, we have a deep, abiding love in both our cities for rock and roll. Another is that both our cities are shaped in other powerful, profound ways by a lake that shapes not just our climate, but our sense of identity and our sense of place. And the other thing that I think connects our cities, Seattle and Cleveland, is the deep, deep pride we take in the richness of our diversity. I'd like to speak this afternoon about diversity and what it means. Because I know at the end of Unity Week, at the end of a series of programs like this, you've heard a lot about this, and I'd like to try to speak in a way that makes some sense of everything you've heard and lived and experienced this week and throughout. And what I'd like to talk about this afternoon are a few things. One is the churn of race and identity in America today. The second is the challenge of unity. And the third is what the real questions are that we ought to be asking about diversity if we're going to be serious about diversity. Let me talk about the churn of American life right now. We live in a remarkable age. For those who are in our radio audience, they can't see just the incredible diversity of faces and people in this room. But this is just emblematic of what's going on in our country right now. Not just along lines of race, but along lines of culture and identity and every other way that people form their sense of self. We are in the midst of a period of incredible integration, intermingling, and hybridization. You know, I think of a line that the comedian Chris Rock actually came up with that I quite like. He said, "You know the world is going crazy when the best rapper out there is a white guy, when the best golfer is a black guy, and when the tallest guy in the NBA is Chinese." The world is going a little bit crazy in that way, and crazy in a good way. Again, for our radio listeners, I can assure you I am not of NBA height, but I am Chinese, and I'm Asian American. And from an Asian American perspective, you get a pretty unique vantage point on all the changes and churn that are going on in our sense of what race means, what identity means, and what being American means. Because Asian Americans, well, for one thing, we live under this umbrella label, Asian American, a one-size-fits-all label that holds within it millions, tens of millions of people in this country from dozens of different ethnicities and countries and cultures. And within that label and within that idea has formed, out of all that diversity, a unified sense of identity. But that's been an interesting process that's unfolded over several generations. Another thing about the Asian American identity and experience is that we live, literally and figuratively, between black and white. And so we see, perhaps more clearly than many others in this country, the ways in which our politics, our language, and our culture of race in this country have to move beyond black and white. You see it in this room. You see it every time you turn on the television. You see it in this country. Black, white, yes, no, right, wrong, good, bad. Those kinds of polarizing opposites, that kind of paradigm for boiling down what it can mean to be an American, doesn't hold anymore. It does not hold the experiences of many more people, even if they are black or if they are white. That language and that framework doesn't quite make sense today, if it ever did, in this country's life. If you turn on the television, if you go on the internet, if you open the Cleveland Plain Dealer or any newspaper in this country, you see the ways in which influences from one culture to another are creating new hybrids. You see the ways in which the intermingling, the intermarriage, the mixing of ideas and bloodlines in this country is making our vocabulary, the sounds we listen to, the images we think of as icons for this American life are all changing dramatically and churning. Well, that churn is, in my view, undoubtedly a great thing. That churn is, in many ways, what it means to be American. The melting pot metaphor is never one that's felt comfortable to me, because that's all about melting down and boiling away and coming up with a single kind of alloy. But the churn of materials and people and fibers and metals and ideas, that churn is what it means to be American. Well, in that churn, though, is the danger of a centrifugal force, the danger of fragmentation. We are so many different people now. In public life today, in politics, in the media, in culture, in pop culture, there are so many different voices and so many different niches, and you can find your own tiny little niche. Not just Asian American, but Chinese American. Not just Chinese American, but Chinese American from the mainland. Not just Chinese American from the mainland, but Chinese American from the mainland, second generation. Not just Chinese American from the mainland, second generation, but from the East Coast, and so on and so forth and so forth. You can keep on parsing and parsing and parsing. And the age of identity that we live in now encourages that. On the one hand, as I say, that's a wonderful, empowering thing because it allows people in ways that generations past didn't have the freedom to do to find their own voice. On the other hand, the age of identity is also quite potentially an age of fragmentation, an age where everybody goes their own way, where everybody finds their tiny little niche and their tiny little clump and feel content to be among those of their clump, however narrowly or broadly they want to define that. And so the second thing I think that I want to talk about today is the challenge, then, of unity. Given the churn, given the fragmentation, given the wonder of hybridity in this country, how do we sustain unity? What makes for unity? Unity is not just a word. It's not just a theme for a week. It's a challenge. It's the fundamental American challenge. And when you think about what it is that makes unity, well, you think of a couple of things. Perhaps most profoundly, you think of shared experience, shared suffering, shared joy, shared struggle. It can be anything from the Olympics, the International Children's Games. It can be the shared suffering and worry of having family or friends in harm's way right now in Iraq or the Middle East or Afghanistan. It can be the shared anxiety of not knowing where the country's headed. It can be the shared joy and pride of seeing Americans do great things, or seeing people from our cities or our communities do great things and say great things. But when you actually stop and think about it, the sad reality of American life, but just life generally, is that opportunities for hugely bonded shared experience are the exception, not the rule. The Olympics come but every 4 years. Opportunities for people to gather together from different races and classes and cultures and neighborhoods and do something together, that's not an everyday experience for most people. I know in the room today we are blessed to be joined by people from City Year, which, as many of you know, is a youth service corps that has operations here in Cleveland and about a dozen other cities around the country. That's dedicated to bringing people together from all races and backgrounds and cultures and join them in a year of service to the community where they form bonds, where the being together is not just about, hey, let's be together and talk about being Asian or Latino or African American and talk about our identity, where the point of the being together is actually to go out and do something, build something, clean up a park, tutor somebody, create a school. But again, let's be honest, City Year is the exception, not the rule. Organizations and institutions and opportunities like that for us to form those kinds of deeply bonded shared experiences are not part of our everyday lives. And so the other question then is, what else can we do to form unity? What else can we do to meet that challenge that's implicit in American life? And to me, the answer is not just looking for those big, happy moments where everybody does come together for shared experience, but actually learn to use our eyes, our ears, and our heart in a different way. And to see in our everyday lives and experiences that are fragmented, that are separate, to see in them invisible lines of connection. To see in somebody else in this room right now, who you may not know, who you don't know a thing about their line of work, their family history, or whatever, to actually stop and look at them for a moment and set aside the first pigeonhole you put them in, and set aside the second idea you might have had about them, and learn how to listen. Learn how to listen for their story. Not just because they might have an interesting story to tell, but because out of that story, I guarantee you, you will find your story. That's not about gathering together for big events. That's about learning how to see in a different way. That's about taking the raw material of your everyday life, at work, at play, at home, and turning it into something different. That kind of eye and sight for the invisible threads is something that takes a lot of effort. It takes a self-conscious sense of purpose to train yourself to see that way. You know, I spent the last 2 years traveling around the country. And the reason why I even talk about this kind of second sight is because I spent these 2 years traveling around the country looking for people of all different kinds. It was for a book that I've just finished writing that'll be coming out in January called Guiding Lights. And the book is all about life-changing mentors and teachers from all different walks and cultures and races and corners of the country, and how it is that they form transformative relationships with their apprentices of various kinds. And it's everything from a Marine Corps drill instructor to a Hollywood acting coach to a master clown to a major politician to an inner-city entrepreneur, you name it. All kinds of folks. And the idea that animated me on that journey was that in everybody's story is contained everybody else's story. And when you go around and you go to different parts of this country and you look for teachers, you look for mentors, you look for people who can be guides, not only for yourself, but for somebody else perhaps, what you end up creating in your mind and in your heart is a composite. You start cobbling together, like a mosaic, an image, kind of a meta-mentor, somebody who can be there for you, who's not just one person who you've worked with, one person who's shaped you, but is the sum and the total expression of every single encounter you've ever had with somebody who has a gift for reaching and teaching and changing and touching people. You know, some of the stories from this journey, from this book, and the search for guiding lights, I think are emblematic. I mentioned an inner city entrepreneur. One of the people who I write about is a fellow in Southeast Washington, D.C., who was a serially failed entrepreneur. Time and time and time again, could not get a business to succeed. And he only found his calling when he found somebody else who was just like him, but alone. And he became, for that person, a teacher. He became, for that person, a teacher of how to start and run a business. He became, for that person, a guide and a mentor about what it means to summon within yourself the capacity to fight the odds of living in Anacostia, D.C., and to create a sense of possibility and identity out of that circumstance. And it was through becoming the teacher that this person found his sense not only of calling, but of purpose. And it was through finding a sense of calling and purpose that he ultimately became the kind of entrepreneur that he wanted to be. There is in this journey as well an Orthodox rabbi in Boston who founded a very unorthodox Jewish day school. And the idea of this Jewish day school, which connects with the themes of our conversation today, was that it would be a pluralistic school, not just for Orthodox, not just for Reform, not just for conservative Jews, but for people from all parts of the Jewish faith. And he would bring these people under one roof together with their very sharply different contending views of what it meant to be Jewish. And he would create for them a space where together they would wrestle through those ideas and those questions of what faith means. Well, he created the school, and it was a great idea, and he was pretty proud of himself. But once the school opened, it was the students who taught him. It was the challenges that they brought to him time and again, readings of the Torah, differing concepts of what it means to be a Jew, differing concepts of what it means to be faithful, that challenged him to seek out that deeper sense of meaning. There are stories like this all around the country. There are stories like this all around this room, and there are stories like this all throughout, littered all throughout each of your own biographies. I happened to pick about a dozen to write for this book, but I could talk with one of you today for an hour or two, and I bet you we would come up with a dozen other stories that would be just as meaningful and just as powerful. The sum of these stories formed me in a certain way. They formed me in the way that I was talking about before. They gave me the ability to see those hidden lines. And when you spend time with people and you ask them two fundamental questions, who influenced you and how are you passing it on? When you ask them those two fundamental questions, I guarantee you found a straight, direct line to their heart and to their identity and to what it is that made them. In those two questions, who influenced you and how are you passing it on, is the very essence of what unity can mean or should mean. Let's take a look at that first question. Who influenced you? I'm sure as you're sitting here listening to this, you are thinking about that right now. Notice the question is not, who are your favorite teachers? Who are your best teachers? The idea is not just people who might have shaped you in a classroom. The question is, who influenced you? They may be living, they may be dead. They may be people you have spent a great part of your life with. They may be people you've never actually laid eyes on. Who influenced you? Just in the conversations I've had in the less than 24 hours that I've been here with people like Mayor Campbell and John Mock and others, it's been remarkable and stirring to hear their stories of who influenced them. And they're not just the obvious stories, not just the Speaker of the House or this person who used to run that agency, or things that you can draw a direct line from their current careers and paths to what they're doing now. It's not just those direct connections. It's somebody they met at the grocery store. It's somebody they encountered by accident. It's somebody they read about. It's somebody they spent some time with, maybe at a luncheon like this, and never saw again. Who influenced you? When you stop and think about that and take an inventory of who it is who's shaped you, and you think about that, the answer is not just who shaped you, the answer is who you are. You know, in the city of rock and roll, I know the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame calls itself the place that embodies the soundtrack of our lives. And I actually think that's a pretty good metaphor for what we're talking about here. Because if you stop and listen for the soundtrack of your life, there are a lot of different sounds in there. There are a lot of different underlying rhythms. There's a lot of different instrumentation. There are a lot of different influences from different kinds of music, from different kinds of culture, from different sorts of traditions. Some just a little splice that you caught here and there that you couldn't get out of your head. Some that were pounded into you from the time you were a child. The soundtrack of your life, the soundtrack of our lives together as members of a community, is one that is reflective of that question: who influenced you? Well, then the second question is, how are you going to pass it on? And to me, this is the heart of what Unity Week is about. How are you going to pass it on? Because again, this is a question that goes not only to formal moments of mentorship and teaching, informal institutions of mentorship and teaching. Every city has its big brothers and big sisters. Every city has organizations like City Year. Every organization or company in the country has its formal mentorship or apprenticeship programs that people sign up for and get paired up with a buddy. Everybody has that. I'm not talking about that. When you ask the question, how are you passing it on? How are you passing on the influences that have shaped you? The answer comes much more powerfully and meaningfully in your everyday experience. Because every one of us, in every social role we play, as a parent, as a manager, as a spouse, as a leader, as a coach, as a neighbor, as a pastor, as a guide, every one of us is a teacher. But the problem is we're only mindful of that a fraction of the time. And then we're only trying to get better at it a fraction of that time. And so when you think about who it is and how it is that you're passing it on, to me, this is the very essence of the challenge of unity and diversity. Because when you take these two inventories, who influenced you and how are you passing it on? Are you passing it on through play? Are you passing it on through work? Are you passing it on through casual conversation? Are you passing it on through the example you set unwittingly? Are you passing it on through the choices you make in everyday life? When you take those two kinds of inventories about influence and how you're passing it on, the question then that you have to ask is, well, how diverse are those inventories? Are the sources of people who have shaped me as diverse as humanity, as diverse as this city, as diverse as they could be? If the answer is no, then you got some work to do. And guess what? The answer is no. Are the ways that I'm trying to pass things on as diverse as they could be? Am I reaching as many different kinds of people as I could be? Am I breaking out of my clump, my rut, my track? The answer again is probably no, because that's the nature of life. That's the nature of life. Doesn't matter what class you come from, doesn't matter what line of work you come from, that's the nature of life. Well, why does it matter? Why does it matter that when we take these inventories, when we take stock of who shaped us and how we're trying to pass it on, why does it matter that we make those as fully and richly diverse as they possibly can be, besides just kind of getting a pat on the back during Unity Week? Why should it matter? Well, to me, again, this is why it matters to be an American. If you don't think it matters, that you're an American, then you probably don't think it matters how you answer those other questions. If you think that life here is perfectly interchangeable with life in another part of the world, then you probably don't want to take measure of your inventories. But I think that the whole idea of a city like this and the whole idea of a country like this is that it's supposed to bring people together, very different kinds of people. I don't mean just different on the face of it, different colors, different hair, different eye shapes, different tongues, different sounds. I mean different on every level. The idea of a city, of a great city, like the idea of a great country, is that you bring different kinds of people together, and that together they try, we try, to find the full expression of what humanity can be. The good, the bad, the ugly, the new, the unimagined, the combinations and the hybrids that haven't been made yet, the interminglings and the mixings that haven't been approved of yet. That's the point of a city. The point of a city is to force us together and to bring us together in a way that forces us to be who we fully can be and to show humankind what the full range of its own possibilities are. So as we close this week of celebration here in Cleveland, and as people all around the country think about what it means to celebrate diversity and unity, I just want to close with a thought or two about the nature and the meaning of celebration. Just a word about celebrating diversity. It's become, all around the country, and this is a good thing, it's become a little bit of a cliche that everybody should celebrate diversity. And look, I'll take that any day. 20 years ago, people weren't talking at city clubs or Rotary clubs or communal organizations or fraternal groups or companies or in politics or in foundations. They weren't talking about celebrating diversity. That wasn't part of our vocabulary. That wasn't so woven into the fabric of public life as it is today. And today, it is. Today, every organization that's worth its salt thinks about how, in one form or another, formally or informally, it wants to celebrate diversity. But you know what? I think we actually have to stop for a moment in that celebration and ask ourselves what we're doing. Because in my view, at the end of the day, we shouldn't be celebrating diversity. Diversity is not the thing to celebrate. Let me just say that again. We should not be celebrating diversity. And the reason why is that diversity, for all the effort that we put into it, for all the effort that we put into showcasing it and highlighting it and reminding ourselves of it, is only a means, not an end. It is only a tool. We don't celebrate the hammer. We celebrate the house that we build with it. We don't celebrate the paint set with 50 colors. We celebrate the images that we create with that paint set. We don't celebrate the instruments laying around on the floor, the bass, the keyboards, the guitars. We celebrate the melodies and the music that we make out of those instruments. The truth of this city, the truth of this country, is that diversity doesn't matter unless we do something with it. That's the truth of our lives, one that we have to live every day and remember every day in the encounters that we choose to make every day. That's the truth. Pass it on. Thank you very much.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, in partnership with the City of Cleveland, we are listening to Mr. Eric Liu, former Deputy Domestic Policy Advisor to the Clinton administration. We'll be returning to our speaker in just a few moments for our traditional City Club question and answer period, but first a few announcements. Today's forum is the Tom L. E. Blum Memorial Forum on the Overlooked Citizens of the Inner City, which recognizes a very generous gift from the family and friends of Mr. Blum to the City Club Forum Foundation Endowment. We deeply appreciate this level of support and encourage anyone to consider a legacy contribution to our endowment fund. We would also like to welcome today guests hosted by, and at tables that are hosted today by the Cleveland Department of Port Control, City Year, the City of Cleveland Community Relations Board, the Division of Water, the Friendship Foundation of American Vietnamese, the Organization of Chinese Americans of Greater Cleveland, the Plain Dealer, Margaret Wong and Associates, and SBC. Welcome to all of you, and thank you very much for your support today. We're also very pleased to welcome to our City Club Forum today students who are here as part of our City Club student program. Participation of these students is made possible by a generous grant from the Jeffrey David Epstein Memorial Student Fund. With us today are students from the Cleveland School of the Arts, Health Career Center, and Jane Addams High School. Students and guests, please stand so you can be recognized. Welcome. Now we would like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions, and again, please, questions only from all of you, including our guests today. Holding the microphones are Membership Manager Marcella Brown over there, and on the other side of the room, our Development Director Elaine Yipe over there. Well, we have our first question for Mr. Liu, please.
Mr. Liu, you mentioned the City Corps, and it's very significant. There's a table here of people in white jackets who are from the City Corps. The City Corps, as I understand it, basically does some of the work domestically, which the Peace Corps does internationally. My question is, to what extent do you think the program will be either expanded or continued at the same level, or perhaps even curtailed based upon who the next president of the United States is?
That's a great question. The question about the organization is called City Year. And it is a pioneering youth service corps in this country that was, in fact, the model in many ways for AmeriCorps, which President Clinton created going on a decade ago, which has now just grown and expanded under the current administration. The work of City Year, for those of you who don't know it, is remarkable. I described it in my remarks briefly, but you bring together people, young people, of all different races, backgrounds, educational backgrounds, social class backgrounds, and they serve together in the way that, you know, the old CCC or the old WPA, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Works Progress Administration, used to bring people together to serve, or a more recent example like the Peace Corps. And they work and serve in our own communities. And as I say, this happens in about a dozen cities around the country. The politics of national service, which City Year embodies, has been a really complicated and tortuous one. AmeriCorps, which was the national program that was modeled in many ways on this program, thrived during the Clinton years, and a couple of years ago came under the knife in the Republican-controlled Congress. And it was a measure, I think, of how much this movement has taken root all around the country, that there were tens of thousands of people who not only served in organizations like this, but have been changed in one form or another by these organizations, that they mobilized and were able to restore funding in Congress. And I think right now there's a growing bipartisan consensus that includes not just Democrats, but Republicans like John McCain, who really see the idea and the power of service as something that we should give more than lip service to. And service as something that doesn't just mean taking an M16A1 rifle and joining the military. That service happens all around us, and that there is a role for the government to spur and catalyze and make possible forms of service that foster and strengthen communities. So I think that right now there's an emerging bipartisan consensus. I would guess that under a Kerry administration, this program would thrive. I would guess that under a second Bush administration, the president would be personally supportive, but we would continue to face some challenges from his party in Congress.
Mr. Liu, usually I've word my questions quite short. However, in order to ask this question, I'd like to bring a little bit of personal into this question. I left Germany when I was 17 years old or 18 years old, because Hitler told me and many others like me that they could not have an education in Germany. I came to America because I chose this country for one reason only, and that is because of the freedom and the possibility of getting all the knowledge that one wants. My question is, a lot of my friends have returned from Europe and other countries in the last year and find that the animosity against Americans is so great because they think that America is narrow and that the diversity that we celebrate here in Cleveland does not exist for the rest of the world in comparison to America or in connection with America. My question is, what can be done about that, and how was that possible, this change?
I think that's a very profoundly important question, because everything that I had to say about unity and diversity within the American context is absolutely true if you take it up one level to the global context. And I think the roots of this growing animosity around the world toward America are manifold. Some of the obvious ones, and I don't want to be partisan, some of the obvious ones have to do with the way in which we ended up going to war in Iraq. And that's been well discussed and well documented. But even if you put aside that particular issue, which is a big thing to put aside, but let's do just for the moment, I think that the roots go deeper. The roots aren't about this particular adventure in the Middle East. The roots are about the way in which this country has become not just a superpower, but a hyperpower. That there's nothing in the world that can even come close to contesting the economic, the military, and here's the most important part, the cultural might of America. The resentment that exists out there is not just pure resentment, it's a love-hate kind of resentment. Because people, let's take the Middle East. People in the Middle East, many of the men who hijacked the planes on 9/11 were people who had been steeped in Western culture, people who were exposed in many ways to the freedom, the hybridity, the, as Chris Rogg said, the craziness of our contemporary culture, and who were simultaneously drawn to that because it expressed something about their yearnings, and at the same time repelled by that because it shook them from the moorings of tradition, and it shook them from the moorings of identity as they understood identity. And I think that's true not only for the hijackers, that's the extreme case, but for people all around the world. In France, why does France have such an ambivalent relationship to the United States? They love and they admire our culture, our freedom, our spirit, our blue jeans, whatever, our movies. But at the same time, they feel that this magnetic power that America has is pulling people away from what Frenchness is supposed to be and mean. And so I think the roots are very deep. And the antidote to that is, it's complicated, but I think one part of it has to do with, well, there's only one part that we have direct control over. There's another part that's about people around the rest of the world themselves coming to terms with what they want out of identity and what they want out of modernity. We can't make those decisions for them, whether they're French, Chinese, or Saudi. What we do have control over is the way in which we communicate and present ourselves and connect with the world. And here, too, the themes that I was talking about in relation to diversity in this country, about who influenced you and how are you passing it on, are questions that we have to be thinking about all the time when we think about how America operates in the world. We are the 800-pound gorilla, and we can knock over anything we want. But we have to begin to think about the consequences. We have to begin to think not as Americans like to think in terms of sound bites and 24-hour news cycles, but in terms of generations, and to think about how the acts of today of American dominance, whether it's cultural or political or rhetorical, create their own slow, morbid counterreactions over the course of a generation. Now, there are going to be some people who hear this and say, well, here goes another liberal guy blaming America first. And let me tell you, that is the farthest possible thing from what I'm doing. You heard me in my remarks. I don't think there's a better place to be a human being in the world than this country. There's no better place that can allow more people to express more of who they are than this country. I don't blame America first, but it's because of what we are, because of what we've become, that we bear an extra responsibility to understand how the rest of the world perceives us and how our every action or omission sends ripple effects throughout the world in people's sense of identity and possibility and promise. And so I think that's an attitude shift for us. And you can do that attitude shift a lot of ways. You can hear somebody like me lecture at you and point his finger at you, or you can study the world. You can connect with the world. You can learn more about the world. You can seek out in your own community people who come from that world that we're talking about. You came to this country several generations ago. There are people who came here 15 minutes ago who will tell us better than anything I could say and anything that we could think of right now a very eloquent, articulate, and direct answer to your question. But are we going out to look for them? Are they part of our inventory? I think that's what we have to start doing, and it's about a mindset shift, and it's about being proactive in seeking ways to educate ourselves and connect with people and institutions from other parts of the world. That's the place we've got to start.
Who influenced you, and what are you doing to pass it on?
No fair. I thought I got immunity. Who influenced me? It's, as you'd expect, a pretty broad range of answers. My father. And my father, there's actually two parts to that answer. My father in life, and my father in his absence. The absence of something can be as profound an influence on you, if you're conscious of it, as the presence. My mother is clearly a very profound and continuing influence on me. Bill Clinton, in terms of the way in which he tried to connect dots and connect people. Ralph Ellison, the writer. James Baldwin, another African-American writer, who found a way to use words to capture some of these elusive truths about our experience and at least make us think harder about the questions, if not come up with all the right answers. Bach, I'm very influenced by Bach in the way that I think about everything, about storytelling, about the flow and order and logic of things, about the way that, the lesson of Bach, the lesson of any kind of musical form actually, is one that's pertinent to this age of identity and this age of possibility we live in. Because what Bach is all about is not, hey, I have a totally blank canvas and I'm going to write whatever the heck I want in music. What Bach was about is taking a strict set of forms, limits, and discovering for himself and then proving to the world and to history that within limits and within a set of forms, you can find infinite possibility and creativity. And that in many ways, it requires, you need the limits, you need the structure and form in order to tap the wellspring of possibility. I think that's true in the creative kind of work that I do in writing. It's true in politics. Why do people respond to one politician over another? Because one politician who succeeds is able to tell a story that gives us a framework for our lives. Tell a story not just about themselves, but about the country and about how we can make sense of everyday life. That form and that structure, it may not be a great story. It may have a lot of holes in it. It may completely ignore parts of human experience. But if it's a story that stands up on its own two legs, we're going to want to go to it because we want a form and limitations within which to express the unlimited possibility of human experience. So I think that was another big influence. And then those are the big ones, but I think, on a day-to-day level, somebody who works in the port here in Cleveland, who works for John Mock, struck up a conversation with me yesterday. And she was telling me, she's a cancer survivor, and she was telling me how that experience of surviving cancer had changed her outlook on a lot of things, including how you connect with people and how you listen to people, and how once she changed her mindset and her ear set and eye set, if those are words, she began to discover, again, this incredible wealth of stories in everybody she bumped into. Not famous people, not powerful people, just everybody. And I've thought a lot about that over the last day, and that's one of the things that's actually going to stick with me probably 6, 12, 18 months after this event is over, is that interaction. Not only that she was moved that way, but that she was moved to tell me that she was moved that way. And I think that kind of connection is something that influences you profoundly. So, my mother is probably the one who has made me that open to seeking those kinds of interactions and encounters.
Mr. Liu, my question is trying to ask you to come back to your amazing flow of idea. I am an accidental Asian coming to United States, not an immigrant, but as a refugee from at the end of the accidental end of the 30 years of preemptive war in Vietnam. Really, Vietnam didn't attack the United States. My question is, do you think the globalization of economy will be a good factor, contributing factor to the peace in the world?
I think that's, before I answer that question, I just want to say a word about the title of my last book, The Accidental Asian, because I think it's pertinent to your question. People often ask, what did I mean by that? What do I mean by accidental Asian? And I meant it in two senses that are both very relevant to our discussion today. One, on a personal level, was just the way that I, growing up in a largely white suburb in upstate New York, not unlike places here in Cleveland and places all around the country, didn't grow up with a particular sense of connection to my race or to my identity. And that it was only in later years that, almost by accident, I stumbled into that sense of race and identity, and then came over many other years after that to kind of wrestle with and struggle with these questions of how much you hold on to a heritage, how much you are obligated to, how much the obligation is something you get to opt out of, and how much, again, you are obligated to pass something on when that time comes. But all of those questions that formed my last book emerged a little bit by accident. The second way in which I mean accidental, though, it goes deeper, and I think it goes to your question, sir. And that is just a reminder that race, the thing we call race, that we believe in as surely as we believe in sunrises and other certainties of life, the thing around which we organize our culture, our institutions, our politics, that race is a fiction. That race is an accident. That race, the idea of race and the categories of race, that these are things that people, many, many generations before us, and maybe in a way that's hardwired into the human instinct, decided to create in order to categorize and to separate and to filter out for power. But that when you stop and think about not only the biology of it, because the biology and the DNA science of it are incontrovertible, but about the ethics of it, that there should be no such thing as race, that it should be absurd for somebody from Mars to land on Earth or land in the United States today and say, oh, I see that all people can be put into one of 5 boxes, color-coded boxes, which is convenient. That's really a neat system you've devised, and how wonderful. In fact, people are moving back and forth across all those boxes. In fact, people who live inside each of those boxes today are the product of intermixture from across those boxes. And in fact, in an age where Tiger Woods is our best golfer and Eminem is our best rapper and so on and so forth, the cultural influences and identities and styles and ways of being are moving across those boxes. So the thing that we have to remember every day when we're talking about race and diversity is that those boxes are there by accident. They're not God-given. They're not set in stone. And they're not here forever. And the choices we make, whether it's the people we encounter at work, the people we marry, the children we raise, and the families we create, all these things, one by one by one by one, are going to reveal to us again the accidental, man-made nature of these kinds of categories. Now, to your question, sir, I think that when you think about globalization, it becomes really important as well to see that the instinct and the dynamic that gives us in this country this pressure to put people in one of 5 boxes or one of 6 boxes is something that's going to happen the world over, right? In many ways, America is the precursor. America is the test case for everything that happens in the world. Globalization is just what has been happening over 250 years within our borders, right? Now it's happening outside our borders. Now people don't need to come to America to encounter each other in the ways that they might have had to do when they moved to certain neighborhoods in Cleveland or in Seattle or in Boston or in Memphis or in Washington, D.C. Now they can turn on MTV in Jakarta. Now they can go on the internet from Tehran. Now they can listen to the radio in Saigon. And so, as these kinds of influences and these kinds of forces that have shaped our life in this country begin to shape the rest of the world because of the globalization of the economy and particularly of the media, again, we have a role to play. We have a role to play in helping lead the world in conversation about how dangerous it can be to fall into the trap of falling into boxes. We're seeing that right now in the world. There's a lot of people with a lot of agendas who want to describe what's happening in the Middle East as the beginning of a clash of civilizations. If ever there was an example of saying something can make it so, it is this. Because civilization is not a thing that you can pick up and hold and move from one desk to another. Civilization exists in our heads. And if our heads become so inclined to see things only in terms of boxes, in this case 2 boxes, West versus East, Western versus Islam, Christian versus Muslim, well then guess what? We'll start to live accordingly. So I think we've got a lot to do, both in how we conduct ourselves in this country and how we conduct ourselves in the world, to remind people to break through those accidental boxes and those lines that form that people want to use for one political purpose or another. It's not a partisan statement. It happens in every country to divide and to separate us.
Eric, thank you for coming to Cleveland. On behalf of Chinese community in Greater Cleveland, I too have an influence. I too have something that I want to give it back to the community. And my colleague from Germany, I came from Indonesia. I travel all over the world to 25 different countries for the last 20-some years. And there is a motion in the global, other countries think about the United States. I don't want to talk about the global, I want to talk to the community. You mentioned about diversity, you mentioned about unification, you mentioned about servicing the community. My question to you is, how do you influence your father's generation to give up their so-called, their own heaven or their own society and start serving the community in Cleveland, Ohio?
That's a wonderful, wonderful question. Because implied in that question is another truth, which is that when you teach, when you mentor, when you guide, when you influence, it's not just the student who is changed, it's the teacher who is changed. And that kind of dynamic flows both directions. And that it's not just a dynamic of age and social station, that the young should be wait to be taught, that the poor should be taught to be led, that the less experienced should wait for those who are more experienced to guide them, but that it goes absolutely in the other direction, particularly generationally. And I think specifically for Asian Americans, but I think this is true of every kind of American, the question of how do you get people from an older generation who, by their history, by their culture, by their habits, don't want to engage in the world, is a profound question. And I think there's 2 parts to the answer. One is simply that you lead by example, that you live a life as the Son, that you live a life that shows the Father what the full expression of human possibility can be. And that means that you live that life and you define that life not by the parameters of what the father's generation thinks is possible, permissible, or admirable, but by your own. And that's a really hard thing for a lot of second-generation Asian Americans to do. It's a profoundly hard thing, as it was in an earlier part of American history for second-generation Jewish Americans to do, as it was for second-generation Irish Americans to do, as it's been for African Americans throughout American history for one generation to defy another. But I think that's absolutely one part of it. And I think the other part of it has to be about reminding people in my father's generation, reminding people, whether it's you from Indonesia or you, sir, from Germany or wherever it may be, why it was they came here. Because the accretion and the accumulation of time and experience and age can make the answer to that question feel kind of distant for a lot of people in that generation. And if they actually can stop and hit the pause button on their lives as parents, their lives as founders, their lives as pioneers who had to come to this country and build and work and never look back and never look inside, if they can actually hit the pause button and stop for a moment and then rewind and imagine what it was like when they were that younger person who came to this country, and what it was that they dreamed of then, what it was that they thought was possible, what it was they were scared of. That if they can get their heads back to that place, then I think it becomes orders of magnitude more possible to have that kind of connection and conversation where the son or the daughter teaches the father or the mother what it means to be an American today. Thank you very much.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland Forum, we've been listening to Mr. Eric Liu, former Deputy Domestic Policy Advisor to the Clinton administration. Thank you, Eric Liu. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
Television broadcast of this City Club Forum is made possible in part by National City. We provide financial solutions for individuals and businesses in 7 Midwestern states and selected markets nationally. At National City, we care about doing what's right for our customers.
John Carroll University, educating undergraduate and graduate students to be leaders in business and technology, education, the sciences, and many other fields. John Carroll University, strong Jesuit tradition, solid education, sound future.
Nordson Corporation, a world leader in systems that apply adhesives, sealants, and coatings during manufacturing operations to make today's products work better and last longer.